Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Community Corner with Assisted Living Locators.
Today, we are very, very blessed to have the amazing Melissa Grenier with us today from the Alzheimer's Association of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. We have known Melissa since we first got started. Amazing networking connection, and as you can imagine, the Alzheimer's Association is extremely well placed to help folks out under normal circumstances, never mind what we're going through today. So, Melissa, thank you for taking a few minutes to meet with me and Christy today.
Nice to see you this morning. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the Alzheimer's Association of New Hampshire and Mass and what you folks do and specifically what you do for them as well.
Sure. So I'll start with what I do, which varies from day to day, but my title is Regional Manager for the state of New Hampshire. So what that means is that I oversee the strategic implementation of our programs and services. My background is as a licensed clinical social worker, so I've worked my entire career with folks with various types of memory impairment in a lot of different settings, which is great because when I've worked in long-term care or home care or geri psych work, I think and elder guardianship in Massachusetts in a former life in part of my career, I think that all of those things really mesh really well with what I see happening with families and caregivers, interacting with folks with memory loss. So, I'd like to say that I do mostly everything in New Hampshire except for our advocacy and our public policy work and our fundraising. So I support those efforts, of course, but I'm not in charge of those. I'm happy to give something for the state away to a couple of my wonderful colleagues. So I'm the regional manager for New Hampshire. Our Bedford, New Hampshire office services the entire state of New Hampshire. I just like to point that out. I think because we're located in the southern part of the state, people in the Lakes region and north feel a little bit like we somehow don't serve them, and we absolutely do. I travel to Berlin and Littleton and Gorham, and we do live programs pre-pandemic in those areas. And, the largest thing or service that I want to make sure that anybody watching this video is aware of is our 24-hour helpline, because our 24-hour helpline transcends borders, literally. And so even though our New Hampshire office is part of the Massachusetts and New Hampshire chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, and our chapter is part of the National Alzheimer's Association, right? What we have to offer is available to anyone in the country. And that goes for our toll-free 1-800 number. And that number, so I'll throw it out there officially right now, is 1-800-272-3900. And again, it's 24/7, nights, weekends, holidays. And what I like to remind people, which they probably already know, is that Alzheimer's and dementia doesn't sleep. And so if you need some emotional support on a Saturday, you can't call your loved one's PCP for that. You can't call them for that anyway, usually. So, or resources. And so we are really, equipped to manage the resources that mostly affect our constituents, and our constituents include anybody with a brain. So, we want to help preserve, people's brains and help support people living with the disease as diagnosed maybe right now, and support all their loved ones and caregivers. So we do that in a variety of ways, but I think the best way to reach out and find out about anything that we have to offer is through that helpline on a minimum basis.
That's awesome. And a quick little plug for me and Christy, having recently become certified dementia caregivers, we were very impressed with the level of information we were provided during our training, and it kind of struck us that, to your point, the requirements for having some sort of dementia down the road are having a brain, which makes every human being susceptible to this, which really casts a wide net. One of the things that I've loved about working with the Alzheimer's Association and learning about your supports over the last year is we've connected with some other folks that do caregiver supports. And I'm a firm believer in The more variety you have, the better, because not every caregiver is the same, so not every message can be the same. But beyond that, what I love about what you folks do at the Alzheimer's Association is you literally worry about everyone with a brain. So not only are you providing supports for folks living with cognitive issues and their caregivers, but you're also providing support for folks that deal with dementia in general. So caregivers that work in communities, caregivers that work on their own with families. I think from an overall standpoint, the supports that you folks offer are unparalleled from anybody else. So if you want to talk a little bit more about some of the different kind of supports maybe that you have and some of the other sorts of individuals that can use those supports, I think that would be very helpful.
No, thank you, Glenn. I appreciate those kind words too. We're working really hard to meet the needs of really anybody who's impacted by this. And right now, if we're anywhere near the field that we work in, you're impacted. So, in some way, shape, or form. So prior to the pandemic, we were offering live education programs, and we also offered, videos of those programs on our website. But it just, watching a video about a program for 45 minutes is okay. You're going to get the information, but it's not as interactive. So we had to find kind of a middle place during this pandemic in terms of providing a lot of education and a lot of different types of support groups during this difficult time in order to meet the needs of people living with the disease, people who love those people, caregivers and family members, and then also professionals, because we're impacted as well as professional caregivers and seeing the grief and the loss and the frustration and anxiety that we're seeing everywhere at this point. And also dealing with our own stuff too, right? So we have all the same education programs as we did before. We're offering them through our virtual platform, which is, if anyone is aware of Zoom, which we're using today, but there are some other platforms. We happen to use another platform, but it's very similar to Zoom, and people can either log in and kind of have an interactive experience like this, or they can call in if they don't have adequate Wi-Fi or internet access or a computer. And we are seeing actually a big increase in the number of people participating, whether that's because more people are at home and they want something to do, or even professionals. I teach a lot of those programs. And so sometimes I'll hear from professionals who have logged in and are participating. And they're hungry for more information. And now is a good time. I am getting so many forwarded emails and referrals for webinars and the like. And so it's a good opportunity to fill in maybe some of those hours with continuing education. So we're happy to have folks in wherever they're coming from, including wherever they're coming from in the country, because we open all of our programs up to anyone in the country. So we typically have people calling in and participating from all over the country. So that's great. All of our programs, I just want to remind folks that all of our programs and services are available at no cost. So with Alzheimer's disease being the most expensive disease process in the United States as of a few years ago, whatever we can do to help defray costs for family members and caregivers and people living with the disease, we really want to try to help to do. So that's what we do personally. We've never had to charge for a consultation working with a family or an education program. We don't do that. And we hope to never have to do that. So besides education, which is great, we can give people really great tools and tips and strategies for everything from legal and financial matters to improving communication skills to managing tough behaviors. So those are just a couple examples of the types of programs that we have to offer. And they're typically about an hour long. So it's not going to take up an entire, half a day or a day for people to get this kind of quick information. But the other biggest thing that I'm excited to share with folks is the just wide variety of support groups that we've been able to put in place. We have general caregiver support groups, which we've always had, but we beefed those up and we have more of them now. We have caregiver support groups for people who are caring for their loved ones at home full time, which is an incredible burden. You know, if I was used to having my mom be at an adult day health program 5 days a week so I could work, and now she's at home with me and I'm trying to work, and she has, you know, increased needs then, and supervision needs and so forth, then that's a whole struggle that I need to, you know, deal with. And how do I do that? So we have a support group for those folks. We have a support group in Spanish, a telephone support group in Spanish. So that's newer. We've always had, or for the past few years, we've had an LGBTQ telephone support group as well. So that hasn't changed in terms of the platform we use, but I just want to point out that we do have that and we continue to have that. We have a caregiver support group for caregivers who are on the younger side, whose loved ones have young onset Alzheimer's disease. And young onset Alzheimer's disease is when someone develops the disease under the age of 65. So the folks in that group probably average mid to late 50s, you know, in terms of the caregivers in that group, and their spouses are roughly the same age. So that's really impactful. We have a support group for people living with the disease. That's we're doing that more consistently than we ever have before. We have a brand new grief support group, so a caregiver grief support group. And that is incredibly important because I can't tell you how many times during the past couple of months that I've reached out to a caregiver to do a reminder call. Hey, the support group, you know, you're part of, you know, it meets again on Thursday. Hope to see you then. And they call and say, my spouse just passed away. It could be from an underlying condition. It could be COVID related. You know, we don't know necessarily all the time, but they're experiencing an incredible amount of loss, and societally we're experiencing so much sort of loss so I think that is actually starting at the end of this month, I believe. And we also have another brand new support group that we have is a professional caregiver support group. So the grief support group and the professional caregiver support group we've never done before. So this is very unique to the pandemic, but many of these are having such great support that we intend to continue on with these types of support groups even after the pandemic, because they're making such a, they're having such a great impact. And the support groups, again, no cost. They're 6-week sessions. They happen once a week, the same day and time. And they're just, you know, I'm helping with several support groups, and they're already forming their own little cohort, and they want to continue on forever. And, you know, we've given them the support and the tools, and they could go on to have their own kind of social little network kind of a thing. But we have waiting lists for our support groups. So we really want to be able to support the growing number of people who need it, frankly. So I would say that those are the meatiest programs that we have, you know, and services that we have right now. I mean, our helpline for sure, education, and the support groups. And I just love that we're doing more for professional caregivers as well, because so many professional caregivers support the work that we do, whether it's sharing the helpline, volunteering at one of our events, sponsoring our events, donating to our events, forming a team. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to give back. And one more thing I wanted to share, which I had sent you recently, Glenn, was a new series of programs that we just created that are just getting ready to start. And they're called COVID Caring Conversations. And these are fantastic because they're only 30 minutes long. And so these will be addressing issues like how to live daily with less stress. Well, who doesn't want that, whether we're in a pandemic or not? Especially if you're a caregiver, who is taking care of their loved one at home. But even if you're not, we've got a caring conversation session just for professional caregivers. Those are an hour long for professionals. But the ones for family caregivers, we've got some for people living with the disease. We've got a legal and financial one. And again, they're 30 minutes. And it's a brief overview about that, and then it's a dialogue. So I think that that's great because most people can fit in 30 minutes of content into their day. So I think that when we're done with one program or service, we're just rolling it right around and we're repeating it so that we can meet the needs of the community.
That's awesome.
That is fantastic. What a great variety of support groups too. I mean, that's needed all the time, especially now. So that's great that you guys are doing all of that for everyone. I know that we're hearing a lot about how the pandemic is impacting those caregivers and those people that are having memory loss. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe some tips you have for some caregivers that can help them during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing for caregivers is, and I sort of referenced this before, and this is something you guys are already aware of, but just the monsoon of caregiver burden that we're seeing folks have to deal with. And not only that, but the lack of informal and sometimes formal supports that they can get to manage that. So not only are they having more stress and a greater need for care, but they're not allowed to ask neighbor to come over, right? So they can go grocery shopping. They don't have, and even if they had professional services coming into the home, a lot of people are making fear-based decisions right now. Maybe they canceled that because of the fear of having healthcare professionals from outside the home come in and bring something into the house, or because of financial matters. There's a cost, associated with that. So if people are paying privately, sometimes people are holding their resources close to the vest, so to speak, and they might be reluctant to utilize the services that are still available, and I reached out to so many people within our networking groups to say, hey, you're open for business, right? And if so, like, what modifications have you had to make? Because we were finding that we were getting a lot of calls from caregivers worried about the possibility of placing their loved one in a residential care setting or needing home care. And how do I do that? And our place is even still operating and so forth. So I think that it's just kind of a cascade, this cascade effect where people just, caregivers, family caregivers mostly, just have this increased need for support and fewer places to get it. We were already not in a great place in New Hampshire, let's face it, before the pandemic. We already aren't well known for having an incredible amount of supports for our older adults or people with memory loss. And so this just really highlights the fact that, it highlights where we were and where we have room to do better in the future. And I think for folks with memory loss, I think, what we're hearing a lot is that they are increasingly experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety. We're hearing that from caregivers and also from professionals in residential care settings. People are saying, I don't want to live, or they're, there are folks with memory loss are already more at risk for isolating themselves to begin with, to the point where it can often lead to self-neglect. And so what we always encourage people to, have their loved one participate in the same activities as they once did, and to interact with others and use their skills and so forth. And right now, because of social distancing, one of the biggest concerns that we have is social isolation and the unfortunate poor health outcomes that can relate to social isolation that have been proven to be connected with the lack of social interaction with others. And so I think caregivers are isolated right now with those increased needs and the fewer places to, that they feel like they can get them. So I think one of the biggest things that I'm going to steal from actually this program, and also what I'm hearing from caregivers in the support groups that I'm helping with, I can't tell you how many people have just they've bitten the bullet and they've learned how to do Zoom, or they've learned how to do Google Hangout, or they've learned to, use FaceTime or what have you. I think that there is it's really helped bridge the gap. I've heard from older adults that said, gosh, I would have never thought to use that. And once I did, it is fantastic for keeping in touch with the grandkids and my kids. And, and it's great for the person with memory loss. I think that, there might be times, depending on how advanced the person with memory loss, there might be times when they don't recognize the person on the other end of the phone, right? But they can still have a pleasant experience. And one of the caregivers that in one of my support groups said it really well. And she said, my mom lives in a nursing, her mother is 51. So her mom is in a nursing home, and this girl is like late 20s. And my daughter's chiming in. Yay.
I love it.
Okay, you can go back to Prodigy. No, not right now. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me in case this doesn't get edited out.
That's okay. It would be great to edit it, but it would be great to leave it as well.
Totally fine. Because this is the world we're living in. We've already gone over that. So this is this is not the exact same example, but imagine if I was trying to work with a loved one with memory loss who needed a lot of redirection. And if they couldn't see me, become anxious. Are you there? Yeah, I'm here, Mom. Okay. They walk away 5 minutes later. You there, honey? Yeah, Mom, I'm here. I'm trying to, so it's not the same, right? But similar in terms of sometimes navigating some of those things. And I apologize. I forget where I was what I was talking about before she interrupted. That's so bad. I always say I work for the right place.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I think it speaks to, the reality that we're all living in, and people that are trying to work from home. As a matter of fact, you were giving some tips for caregivers, in this case, not moms who were trying to get through interviews at work with their daughter looking for some input, but caregivers and other people living in the community with some cognitive issues.
Yeah. So I think we were talking about some of the things that we're seeing with, folks living with the disease and caregivers as well. So, I think I hit on the high point in terms of what we're seeing with caregivers. I was talking about Zoom and platforms like this and how meaningful it is. And I also think that support groups are really a great resource that are, in the past, have been really underutilized. And so people that are in the support group I'm helping with are also part of one or two other support groups. So they're getting support once or twice a week from other peers. And I think that peer support for people either living with the disease or who are caregivers is what binds those people in those groups, that mutual frustration, the mutual, the grief, all of that. And they share tips. It's like, you just have to, some of these groups are like they're running themselves. They share so much pertinent information, and they reach out to each other in between group meetings. And it's just so fantastic to see. And honestly, in such a difficult time that we're all experiencing right now, that is what keeps me motivated when I'm having a rough day, is when someone emails me and said, thank you so much for sending me those resources, Melissa. I really appreciate the follow-up, and this is great. I'm going to look this over between now and the next meeting, or this meeting is so great. Can we keep it going beyond the 6 weeks? And, so we love getting that feedback, but we know that there's more work to do. There's always going to be more work to do until we succeed in our mission to find a cure and an end for Alzheimer's disease. But even when we find a cure for Alzheimer's, there'll still be supports that are needed, and we'll still be here. We'll adapt as need be. But something that you may have referenced earlier was, or maybe I'm just imagining it, has to do with the challenges that the caregivers are dealing with when encouraging these COVID protocols that we're all so familiar with now, like washing your hands a lot, you know, what to do when you go out in public, that we're wearing masks, you know. When I think of masks, you know, for someone with memory loss, there are a lot of scenarios I could come up with. If someone is coming at me with a mask and I'm not verbal anymore, and I am relying mostly on the tone of a person's voice, facial expression. Well, what happens when this much of my face is covered? What am I supposed to do with that minimal amount of information? So there are so many things that are coming up, and we absolutely, you know, recognize that this is not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of mistakes. All caregivers can do is do the best that they can. And the best that they can might be needing to remind their loved one 10 times to wash their hands. Or it may be that caregivers adapt to doing things right alongside their loved one. So, you know, if I'm taking my medicine in the morning, my loved one takes their medicine. If I'm washing my hands, getting ready to go out, or when we've come back from the grocery store, you know, we're doing it together. And I think that normalizes it, and it models that behavior for that person. And it just fits in with what's going on. I think the masks are hard to deal with. And I think it's very confusing for people with memory loss to not understand why they can't go for a walk out in the courtyard of their assisted living facility, or why they can't go outside for a walk with their spouse in their own neighborhood if they're still living at home. What I will do is I will send links to, or I'll send the attachments of some great tip sheets that we just created in the past week or two. One of them is tips for caregivers living at home, taking care of their loved one. Another is for caregivers who whose loved ones are in residential settings. And now the one that just came out yesterday is emergency planning for emergencies. So that'll be maybe a little bit late for this pandemic, but I still think emergencies will come up. Even if someone hasn't had to deal with COVID, someone could have a heart attack or a stroke, or their disease process could get significantly worse throughout this pandemic and the social isolation people are dealing with. So I think it's still worth having. We could still have a catastrophic natural disaster. I mean, God forbid, you know, knock on wood. So I think those tip sheets are really helpful. And our website, honestly, alz.org, has a whole COVID caregiver area right now. And we're dumping these resources there so people can get what they need in a quicker, more seamless manner.
That's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. And speaking of resources and what you folks do, you know, I can remember hearing this for the first time when I got started, and I firmly believe this to this day. The first person to survive is amongst us. It's just a matter of getting the things that we're doing now to fruition, to be able to bring to bear. I've connected with a couple of clients that, unfortunately, it probably won't come in time for them, but even they're aware of the fact that they're the last of the folks that will have to at least deal with this the way that we see it. So I know one of the biggest challenges beyond pivoting for support groups and those kinds of things has been events that were planned in public. So one of the things that I would like to impress upon anyone that can hear my voice right now, organizations like the Alzheimer's organization and some other ones around the state and around our country have fundraisers planned that are not going to be able to go off as they've always gone off in the past. So if you can hear my voice, these organizations that support seniors every day need our help. So would you mind just kind of wrapping up, Melissa, with a few minutes talking about what you have for upcoming events and maybe some ways that people in the public can help support you folks in your mission?
No, I appreciate that, Glenn, so much. And we have had a loss of revenue because we had a lot of springtime events coming up that we had to pivot and modify to be virtual events. Or we just had to cancel them altogether if they weren't appropriate to sort of pivot to a virtual type setting. So there are 3 events that I'm going to mention, and they are fundraising and awareness building events. And I think I'm going to go with the least well-known one, and I'll work up to our walks because I think those are the best known. So I think one event that is that has its home right in New Hampshire is our Ride to End Alzheimer's, which is a cycling event that has been taking place for over 20 years. It used to actually be it moved to New Hampshire a few years ago, but before that it was in Devens, Massachusetts. And so this cycling event has roughly 500 people that participate. In years past, it's been at Odeon Point. This year it was scheduled in June for Hampton, New Hampshire. Unfortunately, getting a group of 500 cyclists together, plus all our volunteers and staff, it's not an appropriate time to do that. So that event specifically, we already have hundreds of people that have registered for that event. And so that either had registered prior to COVID or have, registered since. So we have moved that event to a virtual platform. And what we're going to ask people to do is to have their cycling event, but they're going to be able to do it on their own turf, so to speak. They're going to be able to do it on their own terms. So I think that cyclists have a very tight network, being involved in a superficial way with these rides. I volunteer at the event every year. And I think it's so amazing just to see the cycling community and how they bind together. And so I have no reservations about saying that I know that they are ready and willing to keep, to cycle on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association. And we really, really appreciate their support. Another event in June, and by the way, June is Alzheimer's Brain Awareness Month. So that's why we have sort of, a handful of our events in June. So June 20th, which is summer solstice, which is if folks know what summer solstice is, it's the longest day of the year, just like winter solstice is the longest day. Excuse me. Yeah, did I say that correctly? Yes. Okay. In December, it's the shortest day. I'm sorry. So June 20th will be summer solstice. We have our event called The Longest Day, which makes sense because it's the longest day, the most sunlight of any day in the year. We have an event that is frankly well tailored for the situation we're dealing with right now, because that event is basically customizable. We ask people to pick an event, pick an activity that they love to do. We ask them to, whether virtually or maybe by then, maybe not virtually, but who knows, to do an activity all day. It doesn't mean you yourself have to, bowl for 12 hours, right? But it just means that maybe you get people together and everyone does something for an hour, and collectively you're a team and a group and you've done knitting for 12 hours. And that's to honor caregivers who work from sunup to sundown, taking care of people with Alzheimer's disease. And so The Longest Day is an event that we've had for a number of years. And we have people that bake, people that they're photographers and they volunteer their time to do portraits, and then the proceeds go to the Alzheimer's Association or their team. There's so many different cool ways. You can play cards all day long. Who cares? I'm giving you an excuse to go play cards, okay? So that's great. I mean, this year, I think what I'm going to do, because I learned to knit during this pandemic, which was on my bucket list. I might knit, just get in the zone and just be knitting something. So I love that event because, again, it is customizable. And I think the other event that for right now we have planned, as it's planned and it's sticking with what we normally do, are our walks to end Alzheimer's disease. And I think those walks take place in New Hampshire, in Portsmouth, Manchester, and Keene. And we actually have a fourth one that straddles Vermont and New Hampshire up in the Upper Valley, the Lebanon area. So I think any one of those events, if someone is interested in starting a team at this point in the season, especially with the pandemic we're dealing with, we're really just encouraging people to start a team or join a team and just start spreading the information about the walk. Because once we're able to get out in the community, we're going to be like little butterflies and we're just going to be everywhere sharing that information. So there's no minimum to fundraise for any of our events either. So I think that that is kind of unique in the world of nonprofits. Sometimes I think oftentimes there's a $25, $50 registration fee, or there's a minimum amount that you have to fundraise. And we haven't, had to do that yet. And so we would just love any participation that people have. And even if we're still dealing somewhat with the pandemic and social distancing, we will make modifications to our event to meet those needs. And people can still volunteer right now virtually by being part of one of our committees that, help plan some of these events. So there's so many ways to get involved with us. We have volunteers that help with our online education, our support group facilitators. We appreciate your support for just sharing our information and letting me be part of, this type of program. It's really great to just, chit chat and give people an update about what we're doing and let people know that there's more to come. But we are open for business at the Alzheimer's Association. And, we want to help support any of you that are watching and your loved ones. And we hope that you'll call our helpline anytime you need anything.
It's great.
It's awesome.
Thank you for what you're doing and what the association is doing. It's all wonderful things, and we truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for your time today. I think that was a lot of information that's going to be really helpful to a lot of our viewers. So thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for letting me take up so much of your time. I really appreciate it. And if
very much
okay, I would love to just give our toll-free helpline number one more time. It's 1-800-272-3900.
Awesome. You know what we need to do is get your office assistant a t-shirt with that number on it, and she can stand behind you.
I should have
Melissa,
a sign behind me.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect marketing. Melissa, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.